Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to attend our webinar today. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Hussam Habib, and I am the Country Director for Farmer to Farmer Food Safety and Quality Program. Farmer to Farmer is a USAID funded program, and it is implemented by Land O'Lakes Venture 37. Land O'Lakes is a US farmer-owned cooperative that serves more than 300,000 farmers at the US, and it is among the 300 Fortune businesses at the US. Land O'Lakes Venture 37 is a non-for-profit organization that utilizes and leverages corporate expertise to implement agriculture and food safety and quality programs around the world. Land O'Lakes Venture 37 was founded in 1981 by Land O'Lakes Inc. And we are partnering with the USAID, the USDA, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We work all across Africa, Asia, and Middle East. And we have around over 15 years of experience working in Egypt in the agriculture and food sectors. Land O'Lakes Venture 37 is implementing the USAID-funded farmer-to-farmer program, which is a volunteering program with a special focus on food safety and quality. From our work experience in Egypt, we saw how important food safety to the country. So we are helping our Egyptian food handlers, food chain actors, including governmental organizations and businesses, to utilize the expertise of the US volunteer experts. Usually our US volunteer experts are working directly at the fields with their counterparts, their Egyptian counterparts. But due to COVID-19, our volunteers are working remotely from their homes and their offices to provide the short-term technical support. In collaboration with the USAID-funded ERAS project, the USDA-funded TAI project, the National Food Safety Authority, NAFSA, the Egyptian Plant Quarantine, the Chamber of Food Industries, CFI, the Food Export Council, we have responded to the need of food chain actors to introduce technical support on food safety and quality, specifically food safety culture. We understand that building and enhancing food safety culture is very important to ensure the adoption and the proper application of food safety in food safety practice in food facilities. So having the food safety actors, including regulatory inspection personnel and applicators and food handlers who have the knowledge of food safety culture is very important. And this will help in disseminating the food safety culture among food handlers to ensure the success of application. So we are here today to discuss, learn, share, and exchange our knowledge and expertise in food safety culture between you as experts, Egyptian experts, and the US volunteer expert, Mr. Mitchell Nelson. Mr. Mitchell is a food and agriculture expert who worked hardly at the past few weeks to develop an understanding of food safety culture in Egypt, and he will share his knowledge and expertise with you. Get back to our agenda. We will have firstly a 5 minutes introduction from Mr. Khalid Shadid, the Technical Director and Deputy Chief Party of TAIB project, who will give us some information about TAIB project and the activities to enhance food safety culture. Secondly, we'll have a 5 minutes introduction from Dr. Mahmoud Imara, the Food Safety and Nutrition Team Lead in the ERAS project, We'll talk about introducing the webinar and the ERAS activities as well. Then we'll have 1 hour and 15 minutes presentation from Mr. Mitchell Nelson. And finally, we'll have a 20-minute session for answering your questions and open discussion. So please feel free to post any questions, comments, thoughts at the Q&A and or the chat part. I'd like firstly to introduce Mr. Khalid Shadid, the Technical Director and Deputy Chief Party of Tayyib project. So over to you, Mr. Khalid.
Okay. Thank you, Engineer Hussein. Good evening, everybody. As Hussein mentioned, I'm Khalid Shadid, Technical Director and Deputy Chief Party of Tayyib project. The name of Tayyib project is Transforming the Assessment and Inspection of Food Business. It's a USDA funded project implemented by Land O'Lakes Venture 37 also. And there is just one main beneficiary for Tayyib, which is the National Food Safety Authority. Tayyib started in September 2018, and it will continue through end of September 2023, inshallah. And it aims for 3 main objectives. The first one is enhancing the organizational capacity of the National Food Safety Authority. And the second objective is to improve the inspection practices and improve the practices of the inspectors themselves. And the third objective is supporting NAFSA during developing the regulatory system or the new regulatory system for the food safety control in Egypt. During the last period, we involved in very critical and important issues. The main thing that I can say that we really succeeded to achieve is we supported NAFSA to develop the new import control system. And it's a very modern system based on the risk-based control, which is, of course, international trend now. We finished the strategy of this system, and we finished also the main technical rules. And now we started in the implementation phase, which is, I think, will consume the next maybe 2 to 3 years. Actually, the food safety culture, it's already stated actually in the food the NAFSA's food the NAFSA's law in Article 3 in the clause 12. It's stated very clear that NAFSA should raise the community awareness about food safety. And frankly, I think this will be a real challenge comparing with the other objectives of NAFSA. But this is the real challenge. It's easier to say that I did or I conducted thousands of inspections, and I made a huge number of audits or trainings. But to say that there is a certain number of workers already start to washing their hands in home without a quality manager or a camera watching them, this is a real challenge. Tayyib actually planned to start supporting NAFSA to put a strategy for increasing the awareness of the food safety in the community, and integrate the food safety culture inside the community. We will start this maybe by the second half of the 3rd year. And we think this will be something like a huge initiative, never be completed with just one project. it will need a number of projects actually working on this, and it will need several years to be able to say that we already did something valuable in this issue. طيب will always welcome to collaborate with farmer to farmer, ERAS, or any other project to achieve this initiative. And I think we got a very comprehensive discussion with ERAS, and we'll start together to build this strategy by the second half of the third year of our project. Hopefully that we can all collaborate to raise the awareness of the food safety in the community, and I hope that TAIB can do an important role in this regard. Thank you, and thank you, Hussam, for your introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Khalid, for your welcoming and introducing TAIB and NAFSA's activities to enhance food safety culture. Now it's time to present Dr. Mahmoud Imara, the Food Safety and Nutrition Team Lead in ERAS project. So over to you, Dr. Mahmoud.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank you, all of you, for this collaborative assignment. Thank you, Hussam, Land Olex team, either farmer to farmer or type project. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Thank you for all participants from all value chain actors. We are working and collaborate to strengthen food safety in Egypt. Let me introduce you our project, Egypt Rural Agribusiness Strengthening Project, USAID funded project supporting agribusiness in Egypt, starting from smallholder farmers, processing, and all value chain actors. We are working with different value chain actors as a seek of sustainability. One of the important actors for us, the National Food Safety Authority, and others, and Food Export Council, Chamber of Food Industries, because we are working now to strengthen food safety and starting with supporting food safety culture in Egypt as one of the tools of social behavior change and change management. We have selected this topic, this objective, as one of the important topics now in food safety field, how to support and strengthen food safety culture. It's an important before implementation, development of any food safety system. We need to disseminate food safety culture. We need to know more about how to convince beneficiaries to support effective food safety system. Finally, hope to all of you an informative and I'm trusted from this to have an informative session supporting food safety culture dissemination in Egypt as one of the important topics in Egypt and the world now to have a safe food. Thanks for all of you and best wishes. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud, for presenting ERAS and your activities. Now it's time to present the U.S. volunteer expert and agriculture and food safety expert, Mr. Mitchell Nelson. Mr. Mitchell has long experience working in supporting agriculture and food safety sectors, food security sectors as well, with the USDA and the USAID at the US and globally. Please try to benefit from him. Please share, learn, exchange, and discuss. If you have any question or comment, please feel free to post it at the question and answers or the chat parts. And at the end of our webinar, we'll have 20-minute session to discuss all of your ideas, thoughts, and questions. Now it's over to you, Mr. Mitchell.
Well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate you having me on this morning to share some information about food safety culture and helping you to journey to get there. This Zoom training situation is new for me as it is with everybody else. So if I make mistakes along the way, Please forgive me, and hopefully you find the presentation interesting. So this is my title screen: Food Safety equals Culture equals Behavior, or Culture equals Behavior equals the goal of implementing complete food safety, both for the domestic market and for the export market. This slide essentially sums up what we're going to discuss this morning. This idea of incorporating food safety culture, not food safety, but the culture of food safety in your thinking process. I've heard many people this morning talk about food safety, and they talk about getting the workers to wash their hands. I think after our discussion this morning, I think you're going to see that it's more than just idea of getting people to wash their hands. It's going to be a little different than that. So let's go ahead in the next slide. What I'd like to do is, let's see here, next slide. There, good. I always like to start off my presentations with getting people to think a little bit, to open up their minds. So what I want you to do is, first of all, is on number 1, what do you see? There's a picture there. Type in on your chat, what do you see? I want you to refocus your mind. I want you to focus your mind and get yourself thinking a little bit. So go ahead in the chat box and type down what you see in number 1. Let's get you all participating here. Okay. All right. You should see, most people should see the word good. That's easy to see. But if you look closer, you'll also see another word. If you look closer, you'll see another word. You'll see the word evil. So this is helping you to focus. Sometimes we're looking for one thing, but there's something else there. And that's kind of the process that we're thinking about. Another thing, second question I have for you is, why are you here today? We have very many distinguished people from both the private and public sector. I really appreciate it, but I want you to think about why you specifically are here today and what are your expectations. I'd like you to write them down. I'd like you to write them on a piece of paper in front of you, write them in the chat box, but what are your expectations? What do you hope to get from this seminar today or this webinar today? Go ahead and do that. Alrighty. Give yourself a second to think about it. I know my expectations, why I'm here, is I want to participate with the Egyptian community to help you export more agricultural products, but mostly my expectations are to start a dialogue that leads down the path of better food safety and implementing food safety culture. Next slide. All righty. How many of you, now be honest, how many of you or your family have ever got sick from eating some food or drink? I know I spent, if you know my background, I spent the last 6 years in Bangladesh as the senior agricultural specialist at the embassy. And I can tell you that, honestly, I got food poisoning, food illness, 3 times in the 6 years. And I used to tell newcomers coming into Bangladesh, it's not a matter of if you get food poisoning or food sickness, it's a matter of when. Even if you're very, very careful, somehow, some way, you're going to get sick. And it brings this idea of food safety home to you. All right, next slide. All right. I teach presentation skills. I taught a lot at the embassy of how to give webinars, how to give PowerPoints. I'm violating, you're going to see very, very packed screens today as part of the webinar. I've got a whole lot of information on my screens, on my slides. I have too many slides. But in reality, what I tried to do was create a reference presentation that you can go back and start using the links that I have on the PowerPoints, start using the notes. My notes are very full of information, more so than what we're going to talk about on screen. So in reality, this presentation is more of a primer or a book that you can go back and hopefully start some, gather some information to help you. All righty, next screen. All right, so what are our core objectives today? Our core objectives today are talking about food safety culture. We talk about food safety, but food safety culture is relatively a new topic. It's only been something brought up in the last 8 to 10 years. Most of us, when I worked as a plant protection and quarantine officer, a lot of times the general thought process is, do this because I'm telling you to do it. Don't ask me why, just do it. And that's the thinking many times that we had. We're going to talk a little bit about food safety management systems and what do they really mean and how do they apply to the food safety culture concept. One of the questions that I was asked to discuss, or one of the issues, was GFSI. What is GFSI? And how does it relate again to food safety and developing a food safety culture? We're going to end up with some question and answer sessions of how you can improve both your regulatory and commercial goals. My background is 30 years with USDA as a quarantine specialist. I eventually became a subject matter expert on exports and export certification, teaching it all over Asia, the United States. I helped create the APHIS's export unit, certifying products, opening up the market. For example, I helped open up the market of US apples to Japan and Japanese apples to the US. I worked both sides of that area. So I have quite a bit of experience working in agricultural exports, export certification, phytosanitary certificates, health certificates, animal certificates. And so today, and as we move along, I can share that type of knowledge with you. Next slide. I have some core objectives. I know you have some objectives, but I have some things that I want to get across to you to help you move this process along. I really would like you to start seeing food safety, and for the exporters to see food safety culture as a mean to improve your export certification. It's really, really critical that we, not just in Egypt, but in Bangladesh, where I just worked, we in the US, in the Europe, incorporate this export certification, food safety for the domestic market. We start looking at it through the lens of culture and not just do it because I say to. I want to help you to understand how GFSI can help both the regulatory side, both the public side and the private sector, to understand how GFSI is really important for you to get involved with. It's not just something that is out there, but it's something that you can participate in. And then there's something called the velvet hammer approach that I'd like to share with the regulatory people, and including the plant quarantine week, because this is the approach that I used over 30 years in the plant quarantine wing and the animal quarantine wing, of how to approach regulatory certification issues. So that is my objective today, and I hope to start it. All right, next, here we go. We know the statistics. We know the issue, we know the problem. 1 in 10 people every year is going to come down with some type of foodborne illness. In the world, the latest statistics are there are 600,000 illnesses a year. There's 420,000 deaths a year. 125,000 children die a year of some type of foodborne illness. And this is both the developing world or the developed world, every country has problems with foodborne illnesses. Next slide. We know the cost. You can see right down here in the Arab Republic, Egypt, the cost runs close to $2 billion in lost production because of foodborne illnesses. In the US, billions of dollars are lost in production due to foodborne illnesses. Next slide. Besides money, there are other issues. There are other problems with foodborne illnesses or contamination. So we're going to talk about foodborne illnesses, but contamination. On the average, it costs a US supplier $10 million for each recall. If they have to recall, right now we've got potatoes being recalled in the US because of Listeria. We have salmonella on lettuce and some other recalls. Sometimes there's so many you can't keep up with them, but each recall costs the company about $10 million. And then there's other costs too. There's there's an increase in lawsuits. There's lost productivity of people being sick. But there's also something called loss of reputation. And for the people who export, I cannot emphasize to you enough how much and how important reputation is. And I'm going to use a lot of my stories throughout the presentation. We worked for 20 years to get US apples to Japan. The quarantine requirements were more political than they were biological. And so we just had to work through that system 20 years, and we finally got Japan to open up the markets to US apple under some very strict requirements. Very, very strict, both biological, political, and chemical requirements, where their inspectors would come over and certify the products in the US. I would go over in Japan and help them certify them there. And after making the newspapers, making the news, everybody was extremely happy. One company blew it. After we did all of this work and Apple started going to Japan, one company didn't clean their equipment enough. They use a chemical that's banned in Japan on their pears, and they ran their pears through their packing line, and then they ran immediately the apples to Japan on their packing line without cleaning the equipment. And so some traces amount of the banned wax chemical was on those apples. They weren't there on purpose, but they showed up in Japan at a very critical time, and it almost caused 20 years worth of work to go down the drain. And what happened was that company was kicked out of the program and never did recover their reputation. So reputation, foodborne illnesses, foodborne contamination is really, really critical, not just from a concept of money, but as a concept of reputation. I cannot emphasize enough the idea of reputation. When I worked with plant quarantine, different countries had reputations. We would get a phytosanitary certificate from one country, and we knew that their certification wasn't very good at all. We knew that the government really did not pay attention to the import requirements. And so we inspected those products. We threw away the documents, and we would inspect those products harder than from a country where we had trust and we had faith in the teamwork between the government and the industry themselves. So again, reputation is really, really important, and it's easy to lose. Next slide. All right, we have the statistics, we have the money, we have the loss in revenue, we have the loss in reputation. All of those are very, very important. And a lot of times, some of the only things that we focus on when we're talking about food safety, foodborne illnesses, foodborne contamination. But to me, a more important side to food safety is this issue of how it affects people themselves. Because one of the questions that I asked on the pre-assessment was the role of the government, National Food Safety Authority. The role was to enforce the laws. And in reality, that's not your role. That's not the role of both the regulatory side and the role of the commercial side. Is not to enforce the laws, but to help make sure products are safe. That is the true and ultimate role, both for the private sector and for the public sector, because it has consequences. As you can see here in the upper left-hand corner, a child became blind because of something they ate. We had a mentally challenged person in Egypt become food poisoning at a state-run facility. Students at a university became poisoned by eating the college food because of unsafe food. So food safety is more than just a technical issue. Food safety, when you bring it down, is a personal issue. It affects the children, it affects the pregnant women, it affects the men. And so our whole ultimate goal is to produce a safe product that people can enjoy. Next slide. We have a global market now. I helped globalize the market where food all over the world is exchanged. But one of the problems is that this globalization has led to fears. As people see, for example, there was an incident where some British people got sick and from eating at a very fancy hotel in Egypt, and it caused a stir throughout the European Union. You'll see a headline, Egyptian exports decreased by 20% in January. This, of course, was 2015, and it was due to problems that countries were finding with Egyptian certified products. So again, this creates a fear, this creates a, go ahead and go to the next slide for me. Again, look at the latest statistics. 40% of the people are starting to become afraid of their food. They're starting to worry about food safety. When I was growing up, we never worried about our food being safe. But people are really worried about food safety, and they're worried about where their food comes from. Next slide. All righty. So we know why, we know the causal agents of foodborne illnesses. It's not new. The dangers are not new. 95%, over 95% of foodborne cases worldwide, we know the causal agents. The causal agents are mostly biological. Sometimes they're chemical, pesticides, metals, allergens. We know what causes foodborne illnesses. It's not like cancer. It's not like COVID-19. This is very, very well-known science. And yet, despite all of this knowledge that we have, despite the scientific breakthroughs that we have in farming, we farm so much better now than we did 40, 50 years ago. But despite all of the technology and all of the sophistication, despite all of this, it seems like we're having more food safety incidences ever before. Somebody made a comment about awareness campaigns in Egypt for people. We're going to talk about that, but that is one of my goals, working with the Farmer to Farmer program in Egypt, is to help with that. That's extremely important. So next slide. So we know everything that needs to be done. And this is a slide from 1980s. If you remember, I don't know how popular Back to the Future movies were back in the 1980s, but they were very important in Europe and the United States. Great Scott, foodborne illnesses have not been eradicated. You would think with more technology, more training. I mean, we've spent millions of dollars on training and better systems, better detection systems. You think that there would be fewer foodborne illnesses today than there were 30 to 40 years ago. Next slide. When I was in Bangladesh, I worked with Kansas State University. And one of the phrases, and working with their experts to help work in food safety in Bangladesh, and it was a fairly new topic for me. But one of the things that I realized after working with the experts is, and I used this comment to some of their staff, and they said, "You're right. Food safety is not rocket science. We know what it takes to produce a safe product. We know, we have the technology, we have the detection equipment, we know what it is. There's not very little needs to be discovered on how to make our food safe. So this is where we come in. The idea of food safety is not a technical issue, now it's a behavioral issue." Next slide. I hope I'm not speaking too fast for everybody. Again, my slides, when the presentation is sent out to everybody, I have my notes in the notes section of most everything that I'm saying, in fact, more detail. So again, I'm just kind of touching on the subject so we can get through and we can start this dialogue. The first thing we need to do is we need to start with some definitions. Go ahead, next slide. We're all familiar with food. Both raw and processed food is what we're talking about. And nowadays, food also includes additives and allergens. And so food is not just the product itself, but what goes into the product. I put down a definition of junk food. I've noticed in the countries that I work with in Southeast Asia, we're trying to get people to eat healthy food. And then the question is, what is healthy food versus what is junk food? Next slide. What are foodborne illness agents? These are the agents. The agents are chemicals, biological hazards, viruses, bacteria, parasites like trichoderma worms. Your food contaminants can be, for example, physical contaminants, glass, metal getting into the food, foreign objects, pesticides, herbicides. All of these things are considered agents that can cause foodborne illnesses. Go ahead, next slide. Alrighty, this was another question that I had on the pre-assessment. And again, we had various answers. Food safety, when people talk about food safety, they're talking about a scientific, hard concept of how to make the food safe. They're talking about handling, preparations. Many people talked about washing their hands, serving, having a hairnet on their head. So when people think about food safety, generally they're thinking about it from the old technical side. What we want to incorporate now, and the behavioral scientists and the academias and the big companies, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Food safety is a technical issue, but food safety, more importantly, is a cultural and a behavioral issue. So food safety culture is different than food safety in itself. Food safety culture incorporates not only the technical side, but it incorporates a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at this apple, at this date, at this mango, at this processed mutton, which, by the way, I really enjoyed in Bangladesh. But it's a new way to look at that product from a food health, food safety side. All right, next slide. Our traditional approach to food safety is, and this was another question, food safety on the exam that I had, food safety is, training is the #1 key to have safer food. The USAID, I put down $10 million. In reality, it's $100 million. I made a mistake. I forgot a zero there. But they've spent $100 million around the world in the last 10 years on training. You can get on, you don't have to pay for training. There is all types of sites that give free food safety training online to your staff. You can bring all your staff in, show on a big screen, and go through the food safety training. Training in the US is automatic. If you work at McDonald's, if you work at fast food places, they all go through food safety, food handling training. Yet, we're still having food-borne illnesses on the rise. Go ahead, next slide. All righty. This is where we talked earlier about food safety management systems. For the export community out there, for the import communities out there, for the private sector, I know all of you already have or should have a food safety management system in place. The most familiar concept of food safety management system is, of course, as somebody earlier talked about, is documenting. You document everything. You document how many trainings you have. You document how cold the food was kept, how many hours the food was kept. You look at a hazardous analysis critical control point system. Basically, this is you analyze the risks in the food processing chain, and then the regulatory people too. You're looking, because you can't inspect everything, you have to know where the risk areas are, because that's where you focus on your inspections. And so you have this documented food safety management system, which, by the way, I didn't realize this, the HACCP concept, which is what everybody uses, started in the space program in the late 50s, early 60s with Pillsbury Food Company and our space administration trying to provide safe food for the astronauts. And so they created this HACCP system, which is everybody in the world uses now. Everybody who exports, whether it's apples or dates or, again, processed foods, you all use a food safety management system where you document everything that you do, and then all of you have internal and external audits on your hazardous critical control points. This should already be in place. It's a separate webinar if we need to talk about it, but this is critical to anybody exporting or importing to have a food management system in place. But again, if we have all of these in place, if we have all of these in place by the 80s, why are we still having problems that we do? Next, please. Okay, this is where we come up to food safety culture. Again, in the pre-assessment, many of you felt that Egypt had a very good food safety culture. Well, it's not kind of what I went online and when I had discussions. There's really not a lot of countries that do have a good food safety culture. So I'm not criticizing Egypt per se, but I think if you really look at what culture means, and we're going to talk about that, I would doubt really whether both industry, NFSA, and the communities really understand what food safety culture is. And let's talk about it. Food safety culture is really something that's fairly new. It's started by food safety experts asking themselves, why is this not working? And then they started looking at the behavioral science side, the non-technical side, the psychological side of the training and why. And so they realized that food safety was missing something, and it was missing a change in culture. The goal of food safety, as Yana says, food safety professionals should not to be create a food safety culture, but should be to create a food safety culture, not a food safety program. Food safety culture is the aggregation of prevailing, relatively constant, learned, shared values. That's a technical definition. Basically, you provide everybody in the staff with a common sense approach to food safety. Food safety is shared values, shared attitudes, shared responsibilities, and shared beliefs, all incorporated in the entire community of your business and your organization like the National Food Safety Authority. Everybody should be dreaming, sharing their ideas that food safety step-by-step process is what we do, is who we are. Food safety is about leadership. And we're going to talk about this over and over and over again. Food safety is about total shared beliefs, from the president of the company to the bookkeeper. Bookkeeper is important, to the leads on the line, to the workers, to the truck drivers who bring the product in or export the product. Everybody has the same shared belief on their responsibility for food safety. Every worker becomes a food safety advocate. Everybody. And this is really, really important. And the number one person it starts with and is the leadership, not the middle managers, not the workers online. It starts with the CEO of the company. Next slide. Okay, I really appreciated the discussion and creating a food safety culture in Egypt. Every country needs to do that. I'm doing a little bit of work with Bangladesh, and I'm trying to bring this concept to the team in Bangladesh. They don't need more training. They need to do food safety culture. Now, food safety culture is not something that is going to happen overnight. It's a step-by-step process, and you're going to have to document it. And as the question was asked, how do you document culture? Because culture is more than just black and white. It's more than something that you can write. Culture is in the mind, is in the behavior. And how do you document that? How do you implement that? Well, we're going to find that if you look at this link right here, this link that I've got down on the bottom here is really where it says a key of culture food safety, GFSI. This link will step by step give you the blueprint to start to implement a food safety culture and to document it. You start with a vision, and the vision starts with the president of the company. The vision starts with the chief officer of National Food Safety Authority. In reality, it starts with your leaders. It starts with your political leaders. It really does. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a minute of an episode where I can talk to you about a change in culture in the U.S. But these are a 5-step process to help create and document a food safety culture. Next slide. How important, now if you think, well, food safety culture, in your export certification products. You're going to have to show, if you want to go to the EU, you're going to have to show culture as part of your chain, part of your food handling chain, whether it's fresh dates or it's fresh mangoes or it is processed food. You're going to have to show that you have a food safety culture involved in the processing of this food. If you look on the left-hand side, the international certification bodies, all as of last year and this year, are all putting in food safety requirements in their certification products. The link down below will give you some ideas of how to do this again and what the effect is. I like this quote here. If the only tool you have is a hammer, then you tend to see every problem as a nail. To improve food safety, we have to realize that it's more than just food science. It's the behavioral sciences also. Next slide, please. Okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to share a video where the small country of Bhutan, which is just above Thailand, I'd like to show this video to you to help you. It's just a 5-minute video. I want you to pay attention of their thought processes as they go through the video. Can you do the video or should I do it from here?
I'll do it. Just give me a second.
Okay. And again, I apologize for not knowing how to do Zoom much better.
That's okay.
As we're working on that, the person who talked about awareness campaign in Egypt, I really believe I like the part. It starts with the school systems and it starts with the doctors. Raising this awareness campaign has to start in the school systems. That's really, really critical to the evolution of changing culture. Oh.
Can you hear it now?
Okay, there you go. Turn it on. Yeah.
Okay.
So you watch this video, and this is Bhutan getting the idea of food safety culture, showing that it can be done. Look, there is no food security without food safety. That's true. And look, it's the government in conjunction with industry that's taken the lead in implementing. Remember, they're not talking food safety here. They're talking about food safety culture, creating a food safety culture in Bhutan. For the regulatory people, he is exhibiting what I like to do is he is educating. He is working with the young lady to talk to her about food safety. Food established, practiced by everyone, not just the regulatory people, not just the large commercial outfits, but everybody needs to start thinking about food safety culture. This is their director of their food safety authority, and she's discussing why it's necessary to move from food safety to move to food safety culture. They hold a meeting. They bring everybody together, and I can't emphasize this enough. If I had the chance to go to Egypt, one of the most important things that I would lead in is holding town hall meetings with everybody involved. We did this in Bangladesh with food safety. We even brought in the school teachers when I would do food safety training, because the teachers are really, really key to implementing changes in any places that I've ever worked, including the US. So they bring everybody together to start them thinking and working together in culture, because culture means everybody, not just one person can do culture. They brought in the Australian government team to help people start to think about culture and how do we work through these issues on culture. Again, notice this, something here. Looking at the inspectors. The inspectors are abiding by the food safety regulations themselves. They're wearing the hats, they're wearing the masks. Again, they are demonstrating their belief in safe food handling processes. When I worked in some other countries, the regulatory people felt that they didn't have to wear the equipment because they were there to do the inspections. He's food. He represents industry. This gentleman here represents the industry, and he's talking about how he is seeing the need to change the culture of the people that he works with, including himself. Everybody here is talking about themselves and how important culture is. Again, they're going beyond the science. They're going to a new way of thinking, a new way of doing things. And again, it goes beyond just getting people to think about washing their hands. They understand why they're washing their hands. They understand that they don't need to have somebody looking over their shoulders. They do it because they understand the word why. Regulate, delegate, and participate. For those in the regulatory field, that is the best way to change culture. That is the best way to inspect something, to implement your food safety laws, your plant and animal quarantine laws, your import inspections, is to regulate and educate. Everyone benefits from food safety culture. That was one of the questions on the pre-assessment. Who benefits from food safety culture implementation? And it's not just industry. It is really, really important for the, it's really important for everybody. Everybody benefits. Okay, so what are the, before we go on the screen, I want you to think about the video that you just saw. And again, on my PowerPoint, I have the link. You can go back and you can use it and show it to your teams. What can we learn from the Bhutan experience? Click one. Click for me. Food security equals food safety. This is something that I introduced when I got into as a senior agricultural advisor, that I had to emphasize to some of the bean counters on the USAID team. They didn't see food safety as part of food security. But if your food is not safe, you don't have enough food to eat. Next. I know this is hard, and I had discussion with the Egyptian team and the other teams that I work with. But I can promise you, with 30 years of working with industry, 30 with USDA and then another 8 with USAID, education to educate versus the old-fashioned writing a ticket is the key to change. It's the key to making money. for the commercial side, and for the regulatory side, education is the key to get compliance. Trust me on this. I have 30 years of working with a lot of countries and the US, and it wasn't always easy. I've got stories sometime if I get a chance to come to India. My name wasn't always well looked at by industry and even politicians when I was in USDA. Next. Regulatory agency should lead the culture change. Lead it, be part of it, but not be the only one involved with it. But you need to, when your regulatory agency should lead the culture change, but they need also to bring in the industrial or the commercial side, but they need to bring in the public side. They need to bring in leaders in the public community to participate with this cultural change. Next one. Regulate, delegate, participate. It talked about, again, educate, not regulate. And everyone benefits from a change in culture, not just the regulatory people, not just the commercial people, but everybody benefits when there is a change in the food safety culture. Food safety needs to become ingrained culture. One of the, if you could hear the video on the Bhutan experience, they talk about food safety has become ingrained in their culture, just like we know to brush our teeth every morning is necessary to have good, healthy teeth. Having food safety processes is part of our culture. And that's it. You need to not, it needs to come to a point where you don't think about it. Go ahead and next slide, please. This next slide is really, really complicated. It's too complicated. I have it here again as a reference tool. If you go to this link here, it talks in a step-by-step process of how to start to build food safety, both into the government side as well as the commercial side. It talks about this whole idea of leadership. It all, if you, anywhere that you go, and again, in the assessment, they talked about when I did the assessment and people came back with their answers, most people felt that the middle managers were important into food safety and food safety culture. I hate to tell you this, but if you leave it up to the middle managers, it'll never get done. You'll never create a change. If you leave it up to the staff of NFSA, National Food Safety Authority, you will never occur change. Change starts with the president of the company. Change starts with the head of the agency. And it's not just me saying this. In fact, what I've gathered and what I have read, I'm sharing with you. But every place where there was successful change, and I found several major examples, including Pillsbury, it started with the chief operating officer of the company. Several of the major companies have turned over food safety culture to their vice presidents of the company. And it's as important to them as it is to anybody along the line. Maintaining a food safety culture makes sure that everybody understands the risk. That's really what it means by the culture. Everybody understands what the risks are, and everybody understands their role in reducing the risk. Now remember, you're not eliminating the risk. You're only reducing the risk. That's really important. We're never going to 100% eliminate risk, but our goal is to mitigate, is to lower the risk of what we're doing. And a key point here is, the key word is why. Why? Why do I do this? Why do I have to wash my hands? You're telling me to wash my hands, but what does it mean to wash my hands? Why is it important? And if you say because I tell you to, it's not going to happen. Why is it important for the truck driver to alert somebody that one of the boxes is broken? Why? What does it have? What does it mean? Why, for the bookkeeper, they see a cost for some specialized equipment to detect food safety issues. They need to understand the why of that. What does it benefit? Next slide, please. One of the people said, when I asked this question on the assessment, they said, well, this was a directed question. And you're right. This is a question where the answer is found in the presentation. The most powerful word in food safety, and again, this is not just from me, this is from the people who do this for a living, who help implement it, who help study this. This is from the academias. If you'll click on it, the most important word is, click on that for me. Click on the slide. Here it is. The most important word in changing culture is the word because. Yeah, you're going to have to think about that, and many of you are going to argue with it. But this is true. When people understand it, all the social scientists who've studied this, who've tested this, when people understand why they do something, which is the because explains the why. When people understand why they do something, they do it. When they become part of the food safety process, and that includes the person packaging dates on the line or packaging apples on the line, when they understand their role in the food safety culture and the food safety implementation, then they do it. And again, this is time-tested research that has shown this to be true. Next slide, please. Okay. Some of you actually got this on the assessment. And by the way, I appreciate everybody who had a chance. There were 9 people who did the pre-seminar, pre-webinar assessment. I really appreciate your answers. I really appreciate your time. And I learned a lot from your answers. To improve food safety, to increase food exports, in other words, to make money and to save lives, you need the cultural science, the social science, which is essentially the behavioral science, and the technology to create a complete chain to improve the food safety climate. Because remember, that's the goal of NFSA, not to get the regulations done, not to enforce the regulations. Your goal is to make sure that the end product is as safe as can be. And the goal of the commercial side is, yes, you want to sell your dates, you want to sell your apples, you want to sell your processed food. In order to do that, your reputation is going to have to be, we have a clean, safe product. Because you don't want to hurt anybody. You know, I've worked with a lot of, in Southeast Asia, I've worked with a lot of government agencies, and they don't trust private sector. They think the private sector is a bunch of cheaters and crooks and just out to make money. But the commercial side, a good commercial company will tell you, I don't make money by cheating because I'm going to get found out, especially on the food safety issue. If you're cutting corners on the food safety issue, you're eventually going to be put out of business, because globally, food and food exports is a big competitive product. And if your company is known for selling a product that has problems, you're going to lose business. And the regulatory side has to understand that. And the commercial side has to understand, to make money, to have a safe product, that's how you're going to make it. Not skirting, not sidestepping the issues. Next slide, please. This is a very, very important point. When you talk, even in the US, whose job is it to make sure the food is safe? Most people in the United States will say, well, it's the government's job to make sure that my food is safe. It is the food safety inspector at the restaurant. It's the food safety inspector at the supermarket. And then other people will say, well, you know, it's those evil corporations. It's their job to make sure that my food is safe. Now, there's a tendency to leave out the third part. It is the consumers. The consumer themselves have a part to play, have a role to play in food safety. They have a responsibility. They have a responsibility to buy from a company that may be a little bit more expensive, but has a product that is known to be safer and cleaner. This was a problem that I had in Bangladesh. Working with the general community was they would, because a certain seller would have a cheaper product, cheaper by a few cents, they would go buy from them, even though that product was known not to be as safe. So the consumer has an important role to play in buying from reputable companies, looking at the product, storing the product safely. I just made a pot roast tonight before the seminar, and I made sure I washed the meat. I made sure I washed my vegetables. I made sure I did the seasoning right. I cleaned my plates. I have a role as a consumer in ensuring food safety. I have a role as a consumer to support the NFSA. Politically, I need to let the government know that I approve what the NFSA is doing and hold the NFSA to their feet to their fire, as we say in English, to make sure they do their job correctly. And how do they do their job correctly? And this is the issue that ties everybody together. Everything should be based on science. All the regulations, all of the processes, all of the thought processes, all of the culture needs to have not a political basis, which many countries do have, but based upon science. And we don't have time to get into it, but one of my biggest bugaboos, one of my biggest frustrations is countries having this issue on expiration dates of frozen goods and expiration dates on canned goods. I'm not going to get involved in that. I don't want to start the controversy, but many countries' attitudes on expiration dates are wrong and they're not science-based. All right, next slide. Okay, so we have this need to change. We have this very, very complicated process to do. How are we going to do it? Who's out there is to help us? Next slide, please. Go ahead and click that. All right, there you go. Thank you very much. About 10 years ago, major food corporations like Pillsbury, McDonald's, Pepsi Company, Tyson, the EU Food Authority, they all got together and they started thinking food is going globally. We're having these recalls. Why are we having these recalls? All these countries have different certification schemes. All of these certification corporations have different certification schemes, and it's not working. So the Global Food Safety Initiative, you can see that right up here. GFSI stands for the Global Food Safety Initiative, is an industry cooperative association. They themselves don't write food safety standards, but they work with the academias, they work with the foreign governments, they work with Codex, which is the science board, the worldwide science board that helps science test quarantines and food safety aspects. And GFSI got together, formed several committees, and their role has become to harmonize the worldwide standards on food safety certification schemes. Again, they're a non-government body, they're not mandatory, but they've become so important that the European Union, the US Food Drug Administration, other countries, organizations are working with them to help smooth out, harmonize, and get universally accepted standardization schemes, standardization processes. Again, you can go to this link here and you can learn about how does GFSI helped me as a company. Go ahead, next slide. Again, complicated slide. Sorry about that. You can see here on the left-hand side, these are the various schemes, the various certification bodies that GFSI has recognized as their certification schemes as science-based, doable, and acceptable. It's very, very important. Now, when we talk about a certification scheme, what are we talking about? I've kind of given you a hint. I've kind of laid it out for you right here. Certification scheme includes conducting a risk assessment, progressing and mitigating these risks, finding out, okay, I've got these risks in my process. How do I overcome these risks? Food safety culture comes in on number 3. How do you communicate those risks to everybody and to get everybody to understand their role in mitigating those risks? How do you document all of this? Somebody earlier on had mentioned, how do we document? All of this stuff has to be documented. You have to do self-internal audits, which means you have to have an auditing team. And then NFSA needs to come along, and NFSA needs to audit you also. And there are 2 types of audits that NFSA needs to do. NFSA needs to do an informal audit, where the inspector comes along and says, here are the key areas that you need to work on. And then they need to come along and do a formal audit where papers written up, grades are given, and timesheets are given on when things need to improve. What do all of the GFI recognized schemes have in common? They all involve HACCP, they all involve preventative, they all involve good manufacturing processes, continuing growing, continuing improvement, and now GFSI, as of this year, now all of the schemes are required. In order to get certified, you have to have food safety culture implemented, documented in your organization. If you are a company in Egypt that wants to ship to the EU and wants to be certified by one of these schemes here, you are going to have to show how culture is being implemented in your organization. And it's not going to be easy. It is not easy. Changing culture is extremely hard, but go ahead to the next slide. But it can be done. Now here's an example of a slide that gives you some of the various certification bodies, certification companies, and what they certify. If you go to this link, you'll get a better, more complete breakdown of what each does. You may have to become certified by more than one company. It depends upon how big are you, how much products you have, and what kind of products you have. Go ahead, click on that for me, please. There you go. Here are the various companies that participate in the GFSI. Now, one of the things that I want to emphasize to the commercial people that are listening, you are GFSI. You can join GFSI. You can become part of GFSI as a business to participate, to learn, to grow, to be an active part of the GFSI standard setting bodies. Go into their website. It has a link on what you can do to belong and to be part of the process. And I would really encourage, especially the larger companies, I would really encourage you to become involved with GFSI. And now from the regulatory side, NFSA, I don't want to leave you out. The lowest staff member needs to understand what GFSI is. They need to go through the material, read about it, become familiar with it, and be comfortable enough with it to point their people that they're regulating, that they're inspecting, and point them to the GFSI. It's really nice. GFSI doesn't, in itself, doesn't cost anything. The audits do. Becoming certified is quite expensive for the large companies, but the information out there doesn't cost anything. Next slide. Okay. We've talked about, we're getting close to the end here. We talked about all of these things that need to happen. And what needs to happen is change. On my pre-assessment, I had talked about change, and I had left the words out. Change is difficult, but not changing is fatal. And a couple of people didn't like my putting that in there because they didn't understand it. But it comes to this thought that change is difficult. Change is extremely difficult. Changing people's habits, changing their culture, changing what they do is extremely difficult. But as I like to say to people, if a plant stops growing, if a plant stops changing, it dies. If a butterfly stops, if the butterfly anywhere part of this process stops, it dies. If a company does not keep growing, if a company does not stay active in the worldwide community, you may be able to sell locally, but you will not be able to sell internationally. Change is hard. Let me give you an example. This is a very difficult example. In the 1980s, the U.S. was very satisfied with their food safety and their food safety processes. 3 major outbreaks happened in the 1980s to change everybody's thinking. One was Jack in the Box Hamburger, which is a fast food place. 4 people died, including children, from eating hamburgers that were not cooked thoroughly. And there were 2 other incidences where people died nationally, made the national headlines, that caused people to stop buying hamburgers, for example. Jack in the Box almost went out of business because a few people died. And now they're probably one of the safest places to buy hamburgers from. But this whole idea of it changed people's thinking, and it got new regulations. It got the creation of our NFSA. It got the creation of imposing HACCP. But let me talk about change. You should be familiar with what happened in the United States, what we call 9/11. That's when the terrorist attack hit the United States, killed a lot of people, but it really, really shook up the country. And one of the things that happened was, my organization was Plant Protection and Quarantine. The president created a new organization called the Department of Homeland Security. He took 2/3 of our staff away and put them, they were scientists, regulatory scientists, and he changed them into policemen, into food policemen under the Department of Homeland Security. It really changed everything. Luckily, I stayed with PPQ, Plant Protection and Quarantine side. I never thought of myself as a policeman, but they took, Homeland Security took this customs attitude of not educating, but of being a police authority. And what happened was, after a year, industry started complaining all the way up to the politicians that this change was not working. Food was not safer. Imports were not safer. There were more bugs coming in because of this change. The President of the United States and the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Homeland Security, the President ordered the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Homeland Security to get together and make this change happen. I happen to know because I was at the meeting. They formed a meeting where they brought in industry, they brought in the USDA, they brought in plant protection quarantine experts. I was lucky enough, I got brought in, and for 1 week long, we had take your ties off. We had a meeting. How were we going to make this change happen? And there were no excuses. The president came down, no excuses. We need this change to happen. We need to make sure our food supply coming in is safe. We need to make sure bugs, insects, diseases are not coming in on the food. It's not working. You make it work. The reason I can say this is I was there. I was lucky enough to be a part of it. And I can tell you that the police mentality that was being imposed upon the quarantine inspectors got changed. Now, it didn't happen overnight. It took a couple of years. Change wasn't easy. Change was hard. People didn't want to change. But when the top person in the country says, you will change, you will make it work, the change happened. And so now when you come into the United States, Homeland Security does the baggage inspection for agriculture quarantines and stuff. They do the commercial inspections, but they do it with the training supplied and the oversight of the USDA. So the two agencies work together now, work much better together, but it took a lot for it to happen, and it wasn't easy. And there was a lot of bloodshed, there was a lot of yelling, there's a lot of screaming, but people had to change to make it work. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, how are we going to change? Okay, this is really what you want to know. How are we going to change? We're going to change, first of all, you need to understand if you think that the NFSA is the enemy, or if you think the commercial outfits are the enemy, that needs to change right now, today. Get it out of your mind. When I was in Bangladesh, again, as I told you, neither side trusts each other. I was the first one to bring in the industry to any training that we gave to the inspectors. They need to start to work together. Each has a separate role. Man and a wife has a separate role in a family, but they have important roles. The commercial side, the private sector side, the government side, you each have a function, but it doesn't mean you can't work together. Trust me, you make more money by working together. You get more compliance by working together. I got 30 years doing this, folks. And I'm telling you, not just in America, but in other countries that I've worked, it's teamwork. It starts at the top. It starts with the director. It starts with the CEO of the company saying, we're going to do this. You get together in town hall meetings and you have a shared vision. You have a public-private discussion. Number three, you communicate at all levels. And again, I like the person's comments about you can't wait 3 years down the road to bring food safety culture to the country of Egypt. You have to start now. NFSA, in my personal opinion, now the Land O'Lakes team might disagree, but in my personal opinion, NFSA needs to start communicating at all levels now that we're going to work towards a food safety culture. We're getting away from food safety and we're going to get involved with food safety culture. Town hall meetings with the public and private sector are very, very necessary. And they're not easy, let me tell you. I've led many of these town hall meetings, and a lot of times there's angry people or people who don't understand the process. I know when I worked in several of the countries, they're going, we don't want to do this because the people are going to yell at us. Yeah, but once they see that you're sincere, it works. Urgency and priority. It's not 3 years from now. For the exporters, the EU is demanding it within 2021. You've got this on your plate. Food safety culture is being implemented. You need to give this a priority. It needs to be urgent. Okay, one of the questions that I had on the pre-assessment was this idea of, let me see if I can see what question number it was. Excuse me for a second. It was towards the end. Change is hard, but not changing is fatal. By the way, to reduce foodborne illnesses or increase exports, training is the most important factor. That's false. A change in culture is.
To present that at the screen?
No, I'm just looking up something. Okay, number 20. In order to implement change, and especially the type of change that we need to have change leaders. You need to find people within your organization, and they don't have to be a manager. This is one of the keys that we found with USDA. An inspector who is very confident in what they're doing, they can be a change leader. When I worked with food safety and in Southeast Asia, we would go into villages or towns or cities, and we would find somebody who really got it, who really understood what we were trying to do. We gave them a little badge and we gave them a little plaque, and they became change leaders. They became the change advocates. And that's what we need to happen here is you need both at NFSA, find people who understand what we're talking about with food safety culture. And you put a badge on them and you make them a change leader. The export industries, you find people in your company, you give them the training because they get it, not because it's their job. They do it because they're enthused about it, because they believe in it, because they like it. And trust me, you will find people who get it. You will find people where it makes it work. Number 7 is set up a goal and set up a schedule. NFSA, put a timeline together. Do it and stick to that timeline. If you don't set up goals, if you don't set up, I do a lot of mentoring. I've done mentoring over the last 10 to 15 years. And one of my first steps in when I mentor is I have the people write down 6-month goals, 1-year goals, 18-month goals, 5-year goals. And I have them write it up. They create it. And then I have them keep a journal of how they're doing on their goals. And we come back and we revisit that. NFSA, private sector, set up goals and set up timelines. And then if you don't meet the timeline, don't take the timeline and revise it. But unless you set up goals and unless you set up a schedule, unless you set up a timeline, it's not going to happen. Trust me. I've got too much experience in just the opposite of that. Teamwork, shared vision, communication, schedules. Those are the keys to creating change in Egypt. And it's their keys to change in any place. And change, again, starts at the top. It starts with the top politician. It starts with key actors. It starts throughout the system. Next slide, please. An approach to what you know. All right. The little food safety questionnaire on the right-hand side you can do. Let me explain to what I mean by, and again, this is based upon my 30 years as a regulatory scientist with the USDA. I felt the best approach with working with industry was not through fines, through writing people up, to denying things. I found that the best approach is what I call the velvet hammer. And from the plant quarantine wing, I noticed there's somebody from the plant quarantine wing on here. Hi, I love you guys. I did it for 30 years. No, when I worked with training inspectors for export certification, the most important word that I taught them was the word no. And you say, what? It is better for you if a product, if you've got apples, I'll use apples as an example. If you've got apples and they don't meet the import requirements of the country, no matter how much they want to pay you to certify, to sign this phytosanitary certificate, no matter how much the industry wants to ship that product, if it doesn't meet the requirements, your best word is no. Why? Because when that product gets to the foreign country, they're going to reject it. And it's going to cost the exporter more money with a rejected product than if you had just said no. So there's two parts to this. You say no, but no, your product right now doesn't meet the import requirements, but this is what you do to make it meet the import requirements. I have a story to tell you on that. I've got a lot of stories. But this has to do with Egypt. When I first got into the export business, I was up in the state of Washington, and there was a several $million shipment of apples going to Egypt. I was newly in charge of export certification in the Northwest of the United States, and the apples were covered with mites, insects. We rejected the shipment. I had the inspectors reject the shipment. And let me tell you, it went all the way up to the White House that some crazy federal officer had rejected these millions of dollars of apples going to the Middle East. And who in the blank did he think he was? I found this out later on. And of course, I was very scared for my job. But I basically, when the state senator came to me and he said, I understand you're rejecting this shipment. Don't you realize lost money, lost jobs? And I explained to him this philosophy of no. I said, listen, they're covered with insects. When they get to Egypt, they're going to reject it, going to ruin the reputation of the USDA certifying official. The company is going to have a bad reputation. They're going to have these apples that the country is not going to accept. And so they're going to have to spend the money. So I ended up training politicians in the Northwest because I did a lot of rejections that were not always possible. But I did these rejections for the benefit of the industry. But when I rejected, I always explained to them, this is what you need to get the product to go through. And I ended up establishing a very good relationship with the various politicians. I established a very good relationship with industry. I was tough on industry, but this velvet hammer approach, you only use the hammer, you only use the penalties when a company deliberately doesn't get it. That's when you come down and fines. When I was at the university, when I was at Hawaii, my first job with the federal government was in Hawaii. I did the largest fine against the US military that anybody up to that time had ever done for violating food safety regulations and jeopardizing on ships coming into the United States. Huge fine. But it was only after working with the military to solve their problem was I effective. So I know I've used up more of my time. If you'll go to the next slide, please. I haven't left you with nothing to go on to. These next 2 pages here are very good links for you to go to start your journey of creating a food safety culture. There are a lot of PowerPoints done by professionals, done by organizations who are paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to help lead food safety training. And these PowerPoints are all free. And they will all, some of the larger companies may need to bring in one of these paid consultants to help you. But I would start off with going through the PowerPoints. Again, first thing I would do is I would get the head person to become involved with this, look at the PowerPoints, get together with teams, create a team. The teams start reading these PowerPoints and start making a plan of action. And I know that Land O'Lakes and the various organizations that are helping you here, ERAS, the other team, they can all help you with this. If you want me to, if the Feed the Future people, or if the Land O'Lakes people want me, we can go through these together. But this is where you need to start. If you go to the next slide. The next slide is a resource guide for GFSI. I really would go to GFSI. I really would go and explore. They have a lot of good information on their website about this culture process, about the certification process. And I would ask the NFSA also to go here and have all of your staff become familiar with GFSI, have everybody come understanding with the food safety culture. The issue of culture has been, thank you, the issue of culture has been ignored too long. I ignored it. I have taken hundreds of trainings with the USDA, with USAID. I can tell you in 39 years working for the federal government, I've only had 4 trainings that really stuck and that really meant anything. And one of the things that I figured out is behavior and culture is extremely important in the training concept. So whereas training is important, culture and behavior and getting that behavior is more important. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Land O'Lakes for inviting me. I want to thank the country of Egypt, NFSA, for approving my CV and allowing me to talk. I've learned a lot putting this stuff together. And now if we have time for questions.
Yes, we'll have some time for questions, a few minutes. So thank you, Mitchell, for this important info. We are all working with the food handlers all across Egypt, and we see how food safety culture is important. And this is one of the things that we need to start with right away, as you said. I think we have roadmap now. I mean, from your experience, what you have shared with us, we have a kind of roadmap, and we can start with this. So thank you so much for all of this. Let's move to the question and answers part, open discussion. Please, if any of you have already posted a question, we'll answer. Yeah, we have two more. Welcome. Okay, let's. I think at the chat part there are some questions here.
Again, this is just an overall looking at food safety culture. Some of you may have already get it. I don't know how important it is for you, but again, it's just the start of the process. It's going to be a long process, but it needs to start at some point. And having discussions, asking questions is really important. As somebody, I know that you will give my presentation out to all the attendees. I think you'll find more of the document. The notes for each slide are a little more detailed than my discussion. And of course, I'm here to work with Hassam to answer any questions that you come up with afterwards and any ideas that you want to run across. I think Hassam and I and the USAID supported teams, we're here to ask questions, to answer questions. One of the things that by the way, I wish I was there giving the presentation. As one of my colleagues said, Mitch, you're better if you're here, because I usually give out candy when people answer questions, and I can't give out candy to anybody right now. But don't be afraid at any level to ask a question. One of the things that I tell my students, one of the things that I tell people that I work with, the only bad question is the question not asked. There are no dumb or bad questions. If you don't understand something, ask the questions. And again, I did a lot of training of plant protection and quarantine officers all throughout Asia, the inspection process. There's a technical side to it, but there's also a behavioral side to it. There's a process of how you go and do inspection. Okay, somebody asked, is it the same principles for inspectors and the consumer? If that's a question, yes. The consumer needs to understand, if I was in FSA, one of the things that I would come out and say is, what should the consumer, what is your role in food safety? That needs to be emphasized, especially in the developed world. Too many people blame the government or the corporations, but the consumers need to understand how to look for food, how to pick out a watermelon that's not pesticide, or that's got, one of the things that we did in Bangladesh, a lot of times in Bangladesh, people would color their fruit. And so they would inject color and dye into the fruit. So one of the things that we started doing was we started training or teaching the consumers how to look for adulterated fruit. And so definitely you go and you work with the consumer. It's very, very important. The inspectors, it's very important that you teach the consumer as you go out there. You need to have more than a policeman's attitude. You have a teacher's attitude. Even I ended up being a director with USDA, but my thought process was as a teacher. Yes, if we have questions later, of course, working through Mr. Hassam or any of the people, I'm officially retired but I do this because I want to stay active. I enjoy what I'm doing. I'm looking forward to the COVID-19 going away, and so I can visit some of the countries that I work in. But yes, I would appreciate the questions afterwards. And I know Hassam would also.
Yeah, sure. We have a question about the awareness campaigns in Egypt for the people, starting from mothers, pediatricians, teachers, students. What is the percent of awareness? What do you think about that? I mean,
what we did when we took food safety out to the villages, we of course brought in the vendors, but I brought in the school principals. And so when I talk about these town hall meetings, I'm not sure the Egyptian concept of a town hall meeting, but I would have meetings and bring in the principals, the lead teachers, and I would explain, here's what we're trying to do, and here's the importance, and we need your help to do it. And then I would bring in and I would go to the doctors community. In the US, the doctors are always having trainings and conventions. If the same thing holds true in Egypt, invite yourself to those meetings. One of the things that we did in Hawaii, and I really trying to get other countries to do this, we were trying to get across some biosecurity issues in the island state of Hawaii. Well, what they did is they went out and they got a local celebrity, and he became the spokesperson for the biosecurity that we were trying to do. He produced a 3-minute video, and they showed it on the airlines. And because this person was a local Hawaiian, he was very popular locally, he had a good personality. We did more with that $80,000 3-minute commercial than all the pamphlets, than all the handouts that we did. I would go find a celebrity champion or champions, sports stars, movie stars, music stars. I would work with them to help them support you in what you're doing. Again, you're talking about changing culture. In the US, when I was growing up, my parents would not recycle. Recycling was a communist plot to take over the United States. True. This is in the 60s. Before my parents passed away, you could not throw a can away. They recycled everything. Newspapers, plastic, everything. Why? Education. Education through the schools, through the companies, education's as low as you can. Are there models of companies having found food safety? I think if you go to some of those links, you will see models that are presented. I will send, if I haven't already sent to Hassam, I will send a model that Australia has written. It's a food safety culture checklist. And I'll send that to you, and you can send it out to the people. It's done by the Australians. It's a draft, but I found it very, very good. But again, I need to emphasize to private, public sector, this cannot be a checkbox thing. This has to be a behavioral thing. It's more, as they talked about in the beginning, they talked about washing hands. Ladies and gentlemen, or excuse me, it's more than washing hands. If you're an inspector and you're going into a plant, if they are required to wear masks and gloves and hats, you need to do it too. If you're the chief operating officer of the company, when you go through the packing line, gloves, nets, hats, if they have to do it, you have to do it. Why? It's a cultural change.
Exactly. And Land O'Lakes is one of those models. Land O'Lakes as a US cooperative and processor, we have over 96 processing plants and fields all over the US. We are sharing this experience through farmer to farmer and other projects all over the world. We encourage our volunteers, our experts, our employees to volunteer with farmer to farmer and other projects to exchange their expertise. So this is one, and so many of our staff, corporate volunteers work here in Egypt with the processors and food handlers. to exchange this experience through farmer to farmer. So
and it's just an example. There's a company in Bangladesh depends upon seafood exports, and several of the major processors are ISO certified. They're certified all over the place, and yet they keep getting rejections because when you go and you look at their processing plant, you can see that culture has not been. They have the check boxes, they have the chlorine, they have the clean tables, but you can see when I go through, I can see areas that it's not incorporated, and that's why they're having issues. And that's one of the things, and at the time I didn't know about food safety culture. This food safety culture thing is new for me, but it makes a lot of sense after 38 years in the business. I'm sorry, Hassan, I know we've gone over the 2 hours, but I do appreciate again the opportunity to share with your Egyptian colleagues, and I would be more than willing to share. Again, if you want to have a breakdown and where we can work through the model more on another time or another discussion, I know as part of my statement of work, I need to give some recommendations to you, which I will do, but please give me questions. I feel like I haven't done a good job if I don't get any questions, because I know there's got things. So again, thank you guys very much.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for your active listening and participation. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for your volunteering with us, and we'll be more than happy to have you back or have you here. I'm not sure if you have visited Egypt before or not, but we'll
no.
Okay, I'll be happy, more than happy to have you in Egypt after this situation with the COVID-19. To work directly with your audience now, food processors and regulatory inspection authorities. And please save some candies for us. Make sure that they are safe candies. And thank you all for our partners.
Thank you.
Who collaborated to make this webinar happen. I'm talking about the USAID funded ERAS project, the USDA funded TAIB, the National Food Safety Authority, the Egyptian Plant Quarantine, the Chamber of Food Industries, and the Food Export Council. Thank you all. All our webinars will be recordings will be posted in our YouTube channel. We'll share the links with you, and the materials will be sent to you. Thank you all, and stay safe. Bye.
Everybody stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.